Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining me for episode 5 of what is now called Friday Book Bites, because 15 minutes was far too ambitious to have people who love books talking about books. And today I am thrilled to have joined me Kerri Turner, historical fiction author. Hi, Kerri. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me here. I'm so excited.
We are going to talk about research today. But before we do that, as I always do so that I don't forget, I'm going to share what the giveaway is. For anybody who asks a question or leaves a comment, either live here today or if you're watching it back over the weekend, the competition will close on Saturday night at midnight. And this is the fantastic prize that we have: a copy of Kerri's latest, Daughter of Victory Lights, a copy of the Banksia Bay Beach Shack, and, of course, some Ferrero Rochers to go with it. So... all right, Kerri, let's get started. We're going to talk about research, and it's something that I find really fascinating. For me, who writes contemporary fiction, as opposed to you who writes historical, I'm amazed at how much research I have to do for my novels. And not just the historical threads that I have running through, but even the modern parts of my story I have to do research for. And you know, my characters, when we do go back into the 40s or the 50s or the 60s, I never base them around events. It's about those characters, you know, growing up in a small town in Australia, for example. You, however, do a fair bit of research, I would imagine, into the events. So in the last days of the Romanov dances, you go back into the early 1900s, so 1915, 16, that era, and obviously into Russia. And then in your newest novel, The Daughter of Victory Lights, you're going into 1945 and 1963. So I wanted to ask you a couple of questions around your research. Firstly, what comes first for you? Is it the idea for the novel or is it the research?
It's generally the idea that does come first, but it's usually a teeny tiny little idea at that stage. Yeah, generally something where I'm not even sure yet, is there a book in that? So with Romanov Dances, the idea was a little bit bigger than the second book. I knew that I wanted to write about the ballet dancers and this practice of having protectors that I had found out about just through books that I was reading. And then with Daughter of Victory Lights, the idea was so tiny. It was just a setting. It was the boat, the Victory boat that is at the center of that book, which is a traveling boat that does illegal burlesque performances. However, at that stage, I did not know much. I didn't know it was going to be illegal. I knew it was a boat. I knew it traveled, and I knew it was burlesque. And I knew the era because I'd sort of, the way I saw it in my head, the costumes, because it's a performance, so they have costumes, of course, was very 1940s and 1950s. And that's all I started with. But the way it had cut, that one came to me, I actually dreamt of the boat, and it was just so vivid and fun and delightful that I really wanted to do something with it. And so I started researching just from that very, very tiny spark of an idea. And as I researched, the research definitely informs the storyline that I end up with. So I start with my bigger topic. You know, it was burlesque and post-World War II years for women with Victory Lights, and it was Russian ballet for Romanov dancers. And I just start looking into those bigger subjects and seeing what I can find out, and finding out lots of really interesting things and things that I know have to inform what's happening with the characters then. Like finding out that burlesque was illegal. Well, that has to inform what happens in the book then, because my characters are knowingly doing something that is against the law. So I need to know why and what the consequences for that are and all these sort of things. And yeah, the story just sort of gradually comes bit by bit. And I find my characters while I'm researching. I generally don't base my characters on real people, but it's like they start speaking to me. I start sort of seeing them in my head. I start understanding them. And when I'm researching, I find certain things where I think, oh, I absolutely know that my character would be involved in this or moved by it or something like that. And I know what their reaction would be. So I do try to keep it still very, character focused and driven, but it's the research that's informing a lot of the storyline from that point onwards.
Excellent. I do have some questions here, but there's a great one there from someone in our audience, and it kind of fits in nicely here. So I'll pop that one up on screen from Donna. Hi, Donna. A lot of authors do location research for their books. Without a time capsule, how do you do this for your novels?
It is very difficult because I would love to be able to time travel and just get all those little details right. And unfortunately, I can't. I still, where possible, try to go to the locations in my book. So I did travel to Russia when writing The Last Days of the Romanov Dances. And I did travel to the UK for The Daughter of Victory Lights. I went to Isle of Wight, which part 2 of the book is set in. And the reason I traveled to those places is they're still not frozen in time. Obviously, they have the internet and TV and all the rest of it. But there's a lot of the architecture still there, and a lot of the history is protected there as well. So in Russia, I could visit all the palaces that the Romanovs lived in at various times throughout the year, and I could see their different belongings. And I had a supporting character in The Last Days of the Romanov Dances who was based on a real-life woman called Matilda Kosinska, who was a ballet dancer. And her house still exists, and it's actually been turned into a museum. So I was actually able to visit her house and see some of her ballet costumes, some of her day-to-day clothing, some letters that she'd written, her diary that she kept was there, things like that. So depending on where I'm writing about and when, traveling there still does give me some access to the history and the details of them. But I also find memoirs and diaries, like a lot of old-timey diaries have been printed long after the person has passed away. And they're not always the easiest to find, but if you can find those kind of things, they are absolutely chock full of details on day-to-day life. And that's the stuff that interests me the most. It's not the most thrilling read if you were just reading recreationally. But, for The Daughter of Victory Lights, I have this storyline of this woman sort of chafing against the post-war expectations of domestic life. And I did find a diary that had been published from a woman living in those years. And it was just the most sort of suffocating read. It was just a list of day-to-day life, and it was tedium and just awful. And I felt so sorry for this one, but it also gave me a sense of what some women felt like in that era and the time of their lives. And then I got all these little details on, because she would cook 3 meals a day for her husband. So I had all the details on what people were eating back then, what kind of housework they were doing day to day, what the shops had in supply. And so boring, but so necessary for bringing an era to life.
Yeah, and then I guess what then fills in the gap and is the difference between a historian and a novelist is that we then use our imaginations to bring those facts and those dry, dull things that we read about to life.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Because you don't want a historical fiction book to just read like, a dot point list of here's what people did and here's what people ate in this era. That's, not why we're reading historical fiction. We're reading for story first and foremost. So I do try to, all this less than interesting information. I find it interesting, obviously. That's why I'm researching it, right? All this information, I do then try to insert it into the characters' lives in a natural way, but also a way that reflects or reveals something about the character rather than just, here's a list of what she ate every day.
One of the things that I've read is that 90% of our research does not end up on the page. And I know that's definitely true for me. I mean, I've researched, so many things that help me inform my characters or the storyline, but never, ever make it onto the page. As a historical writer, how do you find that balance of what goes in and what gets left out?
like I said, I always want a detail that is there for a reason. It's for instance, this example of what she ate in a day, I'm not going to just list what she ate in a day. But in the era I'm writing about, there were post-war, there was still food restrictions were quite heavy. So it might be relevant that she waits for 2 hours in a line at a grocery store, hoping they might finally have bacon in stock, but they don't. And she's left with, pig's trotters instead, which is much less interesting. Or you're seeing her cook a meal because we're seeing the resentment she has that this is the highlight of her day or something, those sort of things. Don't just info dump, because again, we read a non-fiction book. If what you're interested in is just learning as many facts and figures as you can about a subject or a person, then you'll naturally turn to non-fiction books. It's what they're there for. They're great sources of information, but you want it to be a story. So it's really highly tempting because you do learn so. It's very much an iceberg thing, you do have so much research under the surface, but that's for you, the author, so that you know exactly where the character is situated, why they're doing the things they're doing, and how they're going to respond to things. It should only come on the page if it's relevant for some reason. And it doesn't even have to be relevant to revealing something about the character. It can be revealing something about the world that character is currently operating in. There's a lot of different reasons why it could be in there, but it's got to have a reason.
I'm just going to apologise. I don't know if you can hear my dog barking. Somebody's at the front door, so I apologise if you can hear Charlie barking.
I'm just going to ignore
it. I'm going to ignore it and hope that it goes away. Got a great question here from Jodie. Because the story forms as you're researching in your case, Kerri, does this mean that you're more of a plotter or a pantser?
Definitely a plotter. I think I really love my stories to have a fictional heart at them. Like the main characters are always fictional, but I love everything else to be as much based on fact as it can be. That's just, where my interest is. And in order to get that sort of historical accuracy as much as I can, I need to know what it is I need to research. Otherwise I'll just have giant big gaps of jumping over my lack of knowledge. So I'm very, very much a plotter in that, when I'm doing that research, the sort of outline of the story is starting to come together more and more. And then once I finish my research, I look at my outline of my story even further and really start to play with it and really get into the nitty-gritty of it. And I think part of me was always a little bit afraid about being a plotter because some people think that it's not a very creative way of writing, that pantsing is like, you make discoveries as you go along. But I find I still make loads of discoveries as I go along because I never have that writer's block moment, that being stuck of what's coming next. I always know exactly what's coming next. So I get surprises with, something that pops out of a character's mouth that I wasn't expecting, or a deeper motivation that I didn't realize that they had. But because I know where they've come from and where they're going to, the motivation came to the surface because it makes sense and fits in with everything that's there. So very much a plotter, but also a huge, huge believer in doing what works for you. Don't try to, jam your process into something that fits another person if it doesn't work for you. Everyone's different, and you've got to find the thing that clicks with you and has you telling the story the way you want to tell it.
So I'm wondering whether we're quite different in our approaches because we're different in our genres. In that, when I do my research, it happens while I'm writing. So I might be 4 chapters in to a story, and then I realize I don't know the thing that I need to know, and then I have to go and research it. Given that you're such a plotter, do you do all of your research and then start writing, or do they happen at the same time?
I do most of it and then start writing. So I think I probably take up to 6 months to do of just researching the subject matter and just building my knowledge of the world that the characters are living in as much as I can. Then I start writing my first draft, and my first draft is usually written fairly quickly because of all that prior research and all that outlining plotting that I've done. But I do have those moments still where, I come to a screeching halt because I'm like, oh, I've just realized that I really need this detail that I don't have. Sometimes I'll go searching for it. Sometimes I leave a little gap to myself or a note to myself in, red font or something so I don't miss it to come back to that moment and find out the detail. I can only do that if it's not heavily informing what comes next, obviously. But so I do some research while I'm doing the first draft, but I'm shocking with research. I keep going and going until that very last proofread draft, goes to the publisher, it comes back for edits. I do a little bit more research and sneak a little bit more in there. And until the very last time I have touched that manuscript, I'm still putting in little bits of extra research. I can't help myself.
It's just who you are. So given that, and I've certainly experienced this, have you ever been researching one thing and then it's led you down, the rabbit hole of research and you found a different story idea? Has that ever happened to you? And if so, do you then tuck that away or write it in your notebook? That's book 4, or?
It happens all the time. I have a huge list in my notes app on my phone. That's where they go. I always jot the idea down. And I think it's really important to write it down because A, I don't want to forget it, and B, I don't want to be distracted by it, because if I'm like, oh, this is really interesting, and then I'll keep going further and further down that rabbit hole instead of what I was supposed to be researching. So I know if I've written it down, then when this book is done or when I've got some spare time, I can look in my notes, go, what was that again? And then start looking at it and go, is there a storyline there, a story to be told? So
we've got a comment here from Donna, who said that she's only just recently discovered historical fiction through the Dictionary of Lost Words, and she loved it. She's wondered why she's never read this genre before. Maybe it had something to do with her history teacher. Very possibly, Donna. And I think this probably comes to what we were talking about just a few moments ago, the difference between an historical text and historical fiction.
Some people have an innate ability to make history very dry and take all the drama and excitement out of it. And it drives you crazy because, the saying, truth is stranger than fiction. I think that's why I love historical stuff so much, because you start digging into the past and the people in any country and any era, and there's so much that's happening that is wild or scandalous or unbelievable that you just think, why isn't it this that they're teaching at schools? That would definitely engage people in history a lot more. But unfortunately, we tend to get taught, facts, figures, dot points, and it's not humanizing history. And that's why I love historical fiction. All the facts and figures of, say, World War II. But when you read a story in which you are looking out through the eyes of a person currently experiencing all those things, those facts and figures become a human thing and all the emotions that come with it. And that's how we connect with history.
And that's what any of us as readers, regardless of what genre we're reading, want from the book that we're engaged in. We want to feel some sort of connection with that character and their story, and maybe put ourselves in their shoes and imagine what it would be like. And I think that's absolutely right. That's the difference between fiction. Maybe you should teach history in schools instead of history teachers.
It'll be all
different, wouldn't it?
Supposed to know.
We've got a question here from Sharon. How do you come up with your character names? Now, I would imagine that's a little trickier when you're writing historical fiction than when you're writing contemporary like I do.
Mm-hmm. Generally, a couple of times I have a character name that pops into my head. So the Daughter of Victory Lights, there's a supporting character called B, but B is a nickname. And I just knew, I don't know why, but I just knew from the get-go that B was her nickname, and that's what she was going under. And there's a whole reason why, like a bit of a reveal on that. But generally, again, because I'm writing historical fiction and I really do aim for historical accuracy as much as possible, I look at the age of my characters in the year that it's set in, and then I look at the year that they would have been born, and I look at all these old lists of popular baby names in the year they were born, in the country they were born in, and go through. But I also want a name that really fits the character. And sometimes I think the hardest one I ever had was in my first book, The Last Days of the Roman of Dances, the male character Luca in there. I think I spent several weeks driving myself crazy finding Luca's name. He had about 12 different names before he became Luca, and none of them were right. And I was like, this is not Luca. And it was difficult because a lot of the traditionally Russian names are actually Soviet names because, you know, after the Russian Revolution, there was this big push to distance themselves from their past. And before that, there were only really a handful of Russian names, and they were most of them royal names. Everyone just kept naming their daughters and sons after royalty. And so the royal men that appear in the book, I thought, well, their names are already out, and that left me with only a handful to choose from. And it was very, very difficult finding which of the handful of names was actually fitting for the character. But he became Luca in the end, and he felt like a Luca.
So when you finally did land on Luca, did you do like a little happy dance around your lounge room, or?
I have been known to wake my husband up in the middle of the night going, I've got the name. And at that point, he does not care because he's going, it's 1 o'clock in the morning. This could have waited until we, woken up. But it's just
couldn't have. Does he not understand?
Yes, it's a huge moment.
They don't get it, do they? They just don't get it.
It was a very big moment. I thought he needed to be awake to celebrate that with me.
I think so too. I would have kicked him out of bed after that. Michelle's just got a comment on the names that she was listening to a talk with Christian White, and he finds his names in the obituaries and flags them to you.
I do have a running list that I keep, again, on my phone in my notes app of names that I hear or see. I like to watch credits at the end of movies or TV shows. Yeah, it's a great source for names where you think, oh, that's a fantastic name. Surnames as well, pet names. Yeah. I also have a list of pet names just in case one day, you never know.
Oh, dear. Michelle has a question. Your favourite part of writing the novel, what is it? And what part of the process do you struggle with the most?
That's a tough one because I think at every stage of the process, I in that moment think that's the most difficult part, which I think, maybe a lot of people feel that way. I think I genuinely love writing. I know some people don't particularly enjoy the actual act of writing. They enjoy having written, but I enjoy writing. But I do enjoy the having written stage as well. Because one of the things about becoming published that has been my absolute favorite things that I did not expect was the generosity of readers with their time and their feedback. So many people have gone out of their way, they've searched my website and filled out the contact form to get in touch with me to let me know, an experience they had reading the book or a memory that it brought up or something like that. And that has just been so unexpected and something that I am so hugely appreciative of. It's been overwhelming in the best possible sense. But the hardest part, I think, actually my hardest part is probably also my favorite part. So that sounds a bit weird. The structural edits. So that first edits we get back from the publisher where it's the biggest changes happen. It's the most difficult in that, for instance, The Daughter of Victory Lights was originally 10,000 words shorter than it is now, than the publisher was. And it was that my publisher and my editors have said, we really like the backstory you put into this character, so much so we actually want to see it. We don't want it to be backstory. So can you start the book earlier in time and fleshed all that out. And that was about 10,000 words that was newly added in the space of about 6 weeks with structure editing. So I was a bit of a mess in like tearing my hair out and going, how do I get this done by deadline? But it's my favorite because the results of all those structural struggles are just so good. You know, you get to the end, meet that deadline and hand it in, and then it's like, oh my God, they helped me turn the book into what I was envisioning, but maybe hadn't quite got there. So yeah, it's but also the most difficult.
A little bit like giving birth, I guess, that once you've got that baby or that book in your hand, you kind of forget the pain.
Now it's worth it.
Claudine, I think, is going to vote for you to become a history teacher. She said you definitely learn more when you enjoy the medium through which it's taught. So yeah, absolutely true, Claudine. Do you enjoy the research as much as the writing, or one more than the other?
I think I probably enjoy both equally. I do hit a point with the research. I love researching the big topics, you know, finding out things like burlesque being illegal, finding out about women's roles in World War II that I didn't know about. Those are really interesting. By the time I get down to the stage of finding out, you know, what kind of shoes did they have, lace up or button up, and what size heel did they wear, and what did they eat, and those sort of things, I start to get a little over it by then, and I really start to feel that itch to get in front of the computer and start drafting the thing out. But I think that's really good because, you know, you want to write it as well, otherwise it will never get done. And yeah, and then I get into first draft mode and have a lot of fun with that as well.
Mm-hmm. Now I'm going to be a little bit controversial here. Normally, I kind of got into a little bit of a social media fight yesterday. And I normally stay away from those things. Like I normally just don't comment or respond or anything like that because there's never any educated discussion or reasoning in those forums. Yeah, it's just emotion. And it was around a reader didn't like a particular phrase that a character was using in a book. And that's fine. There, you know, in itself, we don't like all the same things. The thing that got to me about it was, though, that they talked about the fact that a character of that age wouldn't say that thing, right? Mm-hmm. And I've done research in this, and I'm sure you have, you know, particularly around language and what would and wouldn't be used in certain eras. And the author was absolutely historically correct in this case. So have you ever had a situation where, you know how much research you've done to get to where you are, and have a reader question the validity of your historical accuracy?
Yes, it's definitely happened. I actually took it as a kind of rite of passage. Yep. That I think every author goes to. I did have someone email me after my first book, The Last Days of the Roman Old Dancers. I said earlier that I had one supporting character who was based on a real life woman. And someone emailed me saying, this was sort of what you're saying, a little bit different, because they emailed me saying, I thought the book was good, except for, did you know that Matilda Krasinska is actually Polish? And I thought, well, yes, I did know that, actually. I never said she wasn't. Yep. So, Matilda was Polish by birth, but she lived her whole life in Russia, and she became like the creme de la creme of Russian society and very much considered herself Russian. So that's where I was writing. I was writing her at that point in her life. But because I didn't stop and explicitly say, oh, but by the way, she was born Polish, and I do know that they made the assumption that I mustn't have known that and was trying to pull the wool over everyone's eyes. But I just...
So did you respond?
No, I didn't. I couldn't think of what to say that would be, nice.
Yeah, and we probably can't say here live on video some of the things we'd like to say. Right. We might skate past that one. Chrissy's got a question. We'll put that up, and hopefully it's not controversial. How do you keep track of your research? Do you have to refer back to it close to the final stages before publication?
So I use the program Scrivener when I am both doing my research and my first draft, and then I switch it over to Word. What I do, so Scrivener, it's a program specially made for writers in which it's a bit hard to explain, but you can sort of insert all your research into that, and it has a search function so you can find and reference things very easily. But the other thing I do is that I categorize my research by, so I might have had for Daughter of Victory Lights a section on the 93rd Searchlight Regiment, because that was a big subject matter in it, and I'd have subcategories in there of day-to-day activities, uniforms, equipment, these sort of things. And then I'll have an everyday life section, so what people were wearing and doing day-to-day outside of their wartime activities. And I can easily search and reference them. But every piece of information I put in there, I also put a reference to myself, kind of like an index. I create an index of numbering the books or websites or anything like that I have taken information from. And so when I put a piece of research in there, I put the number of the relevant book, website, whatever, next to it. And if it's a book, I'll put the page number after it, so that when I'm looking at that piece of information, if I want to see the page in the book that it came from, I can straight away know, okay, it came from that book and it's on page 259, and open it up straight away, because I do reference it again and again before publication. Yep. Sometimes just to double check if I'm doubting myself. Sometimes my editor's doubting me and going, was that right? And I double check then. So it's very handy to be able to easily and quickly find that information that I'm drawing from, so I can back myself.
And then you've also got it there in case of reader questions.
Yes. I can send a screenshot or a photo of it and go, look, this book said.
Oh dear. Now I'm only I think 2 or 3 chapters into The Daughter of Victory Lights, and enjoying it so far, and I'm sure that will continue. One of the things that I love about reading when reading historical fiction, and that's sort of my second most read genre. I read women's fiction, predominantly, and then historical fiction is my second favorite. The thing that I love is discovering things that I didn't know about a particular moment in history. I wanted to ask you, what's the strangest thing you've ever uncovered in your research?
I would have to say, again, throwing back to that one woman supporting character in The Last Days of the Roman Dancers, Matilda Kaczynska. So she was a ballet dancer. She was the ballet dancer in Russia at the time. She had affairs with many different Romanov men. She was very, very powerful and influential. And there was a lot that I found out about her that was very fascinating, because she's not really known today. But I actually had to tone down the reality of her, because I did not think people would believe if I put in some things that were true. And the most ridiculous thing I found out was that she was living in an era where electricity was around, but it wasn't super readily available. So in St. Petersburg in Russia, where she was living, you could define the rich areas versus the poor areas by when the light stopped at nighttime. So poor people were living in the dark, relying sometimes on gas if they were lucky, usually candles and what have you. And rich areas had electricity. Some theatres had electricity, a lot still were relying on gas lighting. So that gives you an idea of electricity at the time. Matilda Kaczynska wanted electricity in her house, her mansion that she had, and wanted an uninterrupted supply of it. So she actually had a power plant built next door to her house for her own private supply of electricity.
As you do.
Yeah, everyone does. I mean, why not? You're living in an era where people are literally rioting over not being able to access bread, but why not build yourself a power plant next to your house? Isn't that? She's a character.
That is quite strange. Yeah. I'm going to start wrapping this up, Kerri. Thank you so much. Any last questions from the audience? Type them in now. This is your last chance. I'm going to pop up Kerri's details where you can find her online if you haven't already found her there. Her website, her Facebook, her Twitter, and her Instagram. And while we're waiting to see if there are any other last questions from the audience, Kerri, what's next for you?
I'm working on 2 different projects at the same time right now, which is not something I would advise generally. But one of those situations of being so excited about both that I can't stop myself. But they're both historical fiction books again, both looking at kind of moments or roles in history that maybe aren't super well known, and both with really interesting and complex layered female protagonists. But unfortunately, I don't have anything more specific I can share about them. However, if you do follow me on any of those social media links you posted, I always update there when and if I have concrete news to share.
Okay. So are you just waiting to see which one speaks to you the loudest?
Well, I mean, they both... that
They're
was
both shouting?
But yeah, they're kind of just shouting at each other. So I think both will get done. It's just by working on both at the same time is kind of pushing the time frame of how long it takes on both of them. But hopefully, I mean, one probably has taken over the other a little bit now. So I'll probably keep focusing on that, and then the other one will catch up down the track, and hopefully then I'll have 2 books for people to read.
Awesome. That sounds pretty good to me. Thank you so much for joining me today, Kerri, and thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Donna, and everyone else who joined in today. Have a wonderful weekend. Stay warm. It's a bit chilly out there today, and we will see you online at some point.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kerri. See you later.